Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everybody is doing okay tonight, or this morning. I guess it's early in the morning. And I hope everyone is safe. I know the states are being battered by Hurricane Michael. And this is what, the 5th or 6th that has been battering our country. You could say it's to a certain degree of karmic justice. Not necessarily just on the people who are living in those situations, but you can imagine on our human behavior in and of itself across the world. Kind of tangential to that point. I want to make a defense of third parties. Because third parties get a bum rap, especially in the United States, with all of these people trying to sheepdog people into the Democratic Party. So yes, I want to defend the misfit toys of the bunch. The toys that don't necessarily play well with the other toys because they're not stupid enough to fall into line of this idea of status quo thinking. By the way, if you guys enjoy the content and you find yourself coming back here often, please feel free, yes, I'm checking the sound before I start. Please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. If this video is experiencing buffering, the buffering will be fixed at the end of the video. But yeah, the connection here has been not great. One of the most startling things to me that came out of the Obama era, 2016, was the amount of wealth Obama gave to the top 1%. It is a startling number. 95% of the wealth going to the top 1% from the time that Obama took office to the time Obama left office. That is a startling number. Don't take my word for it. Take Obama's word for it. Obama himself will tell you. I've done stories on this prior. 95% of the wealth expropriated from human beings, from men and women that do the labor. Everything that you see around you is a constructive labor done by human beings, just like us. Working stiffs. But they make this country, they make this world go, and yet 95% of that wealth was sucked out and given to a small body of greedy men. This was not an act of God. This was an act of policy, an act of laws put in by men of various parties. But in this very particular case, I want to talk about the Democratic Party, because the Republican Party has already sold its soul and done so long ago, and I have no expectation of change through the Republican Party at all. I don't even consider them a real party at this point. They're a real party, yes, but I don't consider them any avenue to getting anything positive done. They are a restraint on society. You could say a bar and a door on getting anything accomplished in our society, but so is the Democratic Party. The guy who gave 95% of the wealth to the 1% was supposedly a quote-unquote lefty. They call him a communist. They call the man a socialist. And he's giving 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. That guy who did that went from pillar to post during the election campaign, and every mic that he could find, screaming at the height of his lungs about hope and change. I don't know what hope and change means to you, and I suspect that the whole reason that hope and change was used at all because it doesn't necessarily mean any particular thing. But I guarantee you this, in the minds of the individuals that were voting for him, this euphoric, expansive language of hope and change won it. People wanted change. And in this case, you have the first African-American president. You have a financial crisis, the largest since since the Great Depression. And you have a public that wants something different, that fundamentally wants something different. That man screaming hope and change into every mic, playing on the fact that the public wants something different, at one point called himself, said he was more like a moderate Republican, and he's right. 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. Who makes that argument to the contrary point? That we shouldn't give 95% of the wealth to the 1%. Who prosecutes that case? If the guy who's in the race that does that is supposedly the lefty and is supposedly representing the release valve to the excesses of the capitalistic system, that doesn't sound like a release valve to me. That sounds like the spigot is turned all the way to the max. As bad as Donald Trump is, he can only beat that by 5%. 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. Who prosecutes that case if that's the lefty? Who makes that argument? The misanthropes, the misfit toys, they make that argument. They prosecute that case when what's considered the left is essentially the Republican Party of old, and the Republican Party has jumped off the goddamn cliff. That man who screamed hope and change immediately after the financial crisis gets in office and sets himself on fire to protect the financial industry. I am the one that's standing between you and the hordes. Me, Barack Obama. When it came to homeowners, however, not so much. It was the homeowners that put him in office. Even more so than it was those bankers. It is true that Barack Obama ran a campaign on hope and nearly $1 billion. And he paid that $1 million back handsomely. 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. This was the Democratic Party. What does the Democratic Party stand for? Right? If you're going to give that much wealth to the top 1%, and you are considered the left, and you run a campaign screaming hope and change, what do you stand for? And should people vote for that after being so magnificently let down? Meaning when the next person comes up, after the last guy essentially burns the mic, should the next person get that vote? Knowing that the last guy was able to get over the finish line by playing into what the public wanted to hear. Democrats often say we need a mass uprising and all this other stuff, but this was also during the time of Occupy Wall Street, where this idea of the top 1% and the excesses of capitalism was put on the ballot box. It was put in the main limelight. Not the ballot box, but it was put into the main public eye. Even the idea, the notion, the framing of the top 1% came out of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was during the Obama era. Didn't stop the 95% of the wealth going to the top 1%. If your political objectives are not being eschewed in the public space, meaning in the political instrument that we have at our disposal, why would you support a propagation of the status quo? Why? It is not wrong or insane for somebody to say, my interest is not being represented. The things I want to see affected in the world are not being represented in the political parties. Why am I going to support something that is not representing my interests? And the very act of supporting something that is not representing your interests propagates the thing forward that is not representing your interests, meaning your interests won't get represented the more you vote for the thing that's not representing your interests. The very act of being an appeaser. I always say the political abuse spouse of the Democratic Party, the lefties that actually want to see a different world and yet fight for, sheepdog, put people into a party to prevent that different world from taking place. My goal in this is not to put Democrats in office. I am not a Democrat. I want to see positive changes affected in the world itself. I want to see a change of the status quo, the hegemonic view of things that we find ourselves, where cash is a thing that chooses political candidates, where the political instrument itself being grabbed by the throat of greedy psychopaths. I want that to change. I don't get that change by continually supporting the fact that greedy psychopaths have the political system by the throat. You say no. You say no, yet you balk at the political system. If Democrats want to get elected, then they need to be actual Democrats. I resent this speaking like FDR while governing like Ronald Reagan. And the idea that you would support that is essentially a support of the status quo. Let us be clear on this. There is no magical door. Let's be very clear. The entire edifice over the last 20, 30 years, where lefties have been cowed and set into a corner, where essentially what these guys are saying in the political space, essentially where Bill Clinton takes his rape hand and puts it on the shoulder of Tom Perez and leans in. Don't let Sanders take the party. Don't let the Democratic Party be the Democratic Party. Support for this is a propagation of the status quo. A third party doesn't necessarily have to win in order to exert force on the political space. To some degree, this is like chess. It is true that people in local spaces may be better in specific things, but the overall trend moves it to the left. Moves it to the right. Meaning you move further and further to the right. The one concentration camp less theory. The idea that you vote for this guy because this guy is going to build one concentration camp less, missing the fact that within 10 years this guy has built, yes, one concentration camp less, and maybe the next year he builds two, but he's expanding the number of concentration camps he's building, but you continuously vote for him because your voting is relative to the other person. Meaning, I am so terrified. The political system has ended up being blacks, Hispanics, workers, with the Democratic Party looking at them saying, you have nowhere else to go. So it doesn't matter what we do, you have nowhere else to go. We are going to protect you from Republicans, but you don't tell us what we get to do when we're in that office. You're voting for us, not because we're going to do anything positive, but purely because of who we're not. That construct needs to be broken. And the only way that construct is broken is if support is drained away from the thing that allows the constructs to perpetuate itself. The question becomes, do you want to see positive change effected in the world? And if so, do you honestly believe that the Democratic Party is the vehicle to do that in the way that the Democratic Party is currently arranged? And if that answer is no, then why are you supporting the Democratic Party in the way that it is? You support the candidate that represents your interests. Period. If that is a Green Party member, then that is a Green Party member. I support Tulsi Gabbard, or elect Tulsi Gabbard, in which case if I lived in Hawaii, she'd get my vote. Support the person who represents your interests. But that should not be blue no matter who. The blue no matter who thing is nonsense. The Democratic Socialists of America are rapping Alexandria Ocasio on the knuckles for coming out in this weird way of supporting Como, somebody who didn't even support her and who's snarling, I'm not a socialist. I'm not a socialist. She supported that guy. The Democratic Party loses, or the Democratic Party changes. Period. There should be no other options. Any other options allows a propagation of the way things currently are. I'm sick of the status quo. I am not going to support the status quo. If that means the Democratic Party loses, well, I am not a Democrat, so that's more of a problem for Democrats. If the Democrats want to appropriate some of the issues that the third parties are bringing up, then maybe they should do that in order to get those votes. But it is not the responsibility of somebody else to get votes for the party. It is that party's responsibility to do that. And if they can't do that, that is on them. I want to see a different world. You don't get that different world by continuing to do the exact same things that allow the world to be the way the world is. It's time for a change. If you want someone to prosecute that case, 95% of the wealth to the top 1%. You're not going to get that case prosecuted by the party that gave that much wealth and set the building blocks with the NAFTA, with destruction of Glass-Steagall. I mean, stuff that Republicans would dream of, whether in their dreams at 3 in the morning talking to their God. Oh, I wish I could fuck people over to this extent. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton. I don't know if it's possible to get the change that people want within the Democratic Party. I strongly suspect not. Even under FDR, all of the changes that he did, the iconography that the Democratic Party used, the best that we got was the preservation of capitalism. I did it. I saved capitalism. Well, you have a group of rapacious people who essentially believe that they have you by the throat. There's no magical door on this. That structure is in place, meaning for the last 20 years, lefties have allowed themselves to be cowed into this politically abusive relationship where even though they wanted real things to take place in the world, where they wanted a different world, they believed that they hitched their star to a party that didn't necessarily want that world, but at the very least thought it was better than the other party. There are specific things, yes, but if the goal is to actually get real change, substantive change, our fucking environment is falling apart. People are being raped over the coals. Half of the country is poor or low wage. What, 60, 70% don't have $500 in the bank to pay for an auto loan. And you have the wealthiest country on the planet giving $1 trillion to the military. Who prosecutes that case? Who represents the workers in this scenario? Nobody. Nobody. At least not in the leadership of the party. You have certain spots, but nobody. Yes, this is an ode to the third party fighter. There is nobility in failure. The goal is not necessarily to completely win. The goal is to change the political process as we know it. In fact is, the way that the party is organized right now is done so in a way of fear, as opposed to a way of actually getting things done and meaning anything. The Democratic Party is completely relational to what the Republican Party is. That needs to change, if it needs to be anything at all. Yes, this is an ode to the third party. All right. This one has gone longer than I wanted, but I'll leave it here. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support the Patreon. Thanks all.